This is a good one, guys. I got to sit down with OpenAI's Ben Goodger, the lead engineer building the Atlas browser for OpenAI. We had a really wide ranging conversation. We talk about the history of browsers. Ben, of course, has been involved in building Chrome, been involved in building Netscape Navigator, for those of you with gray hairs. And now he's taking the lead on building the AI powered browsers of the future at OpenAI. So I had a lot of fun. We talked about what the future looks like. We talked about security implications. We talked about the way we get work done and how that's changing. It was a super wide ranging conversation. I put a cut up here on YouTube. And if you want the full cut, of course, you can go over to Substack. Enjoy. And yeah, let's talk about AI powered browsers. Hey, all, I'm Nate, and I have a special guest with me today. Ben, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ben, and I am the head of engineering for ChatGPT Atlas here at OpenAI.
And how did you get to be head of engineering at ChatGPT Atlas?
I've always been interested in the web browsers, going back to, I guess, like the mid to late 1990s when the web was first developing. I was like a hobbyist web developer building sites just for fun. And early in my career, I got involved with Mozilla. It was an open source project, made contributions to that, ended up getting hired by Netscape. And so when I grew up in New Zealand, I moved up to Silicon Valley for a period of time, got to see Netscape in its final days, which was an interesting experience. But ended up moving on to Mozilla, where I helped work on Firefox, the first version of that, and then moved to Google. I was at Google for nearly 20 years, helped build the Chrome browser there. And then about almost 18 months ago, I came over to OpenAI. I was very interested in exploring what the web would look like if you see it through the eyes of maybe having an assistant like ChatGPT really at the core of the browsing experience. And so since then have been trying to build that. And then we shipped our Atlas product for a Mac a couple of weeks ago, which is really exciting.
I am really curious to hear, you've shared a bit about what made it compelling for you to come to OpenAI, the sort of the piece of having intelligence on the web. What is it that you felt like you learned or that crystallized for you along that journey over the last 18 months that gave you a sense of clarity about what you wanted Atlas to be and where you wanted to take Atlas?
I think that, the Atlas product, at face value, it kind of resembles a traditional browser. And I think
Mhm.
that that's important because everyone knows what a browser is. Everyone uses a browser on a pretty frequent basis. So I think there was an aspect of we need to build something that people can understand,
Sure.
even as we try and bring really advanced capabilities into it. And then the other thing that I've learned is that the pace of development of the tech that is happening here at OpenAI is just so incredibly fast that even some of the limitations that you might see 1 month won't be there the next month. So just as we've built features like agent, seeing that come together, seeing that get much faster, get much more accurate at clicking on things and doing stuff for you on the web. I've learned to be more uh, I'm an optimistic person by nature, but like even more optimistic about where this tech is going and what types of product experiences that will enable.
What is it about your working style or the team's working style that has shifted over the last 18 months as you've been working on building this browser?
Now, for me, when I joined, I'm the team manager, but also like when I was the first person here working on this, I was also writing, code, doing prototypes, that type of thing. I used ChatGPT early on extensively to help me learn new programming languages and like really get up and running again. But then as we had more and more engineers join the team, and then we also launched products like Codex. We've gone on the evolution of Codex, especially Codex CLI. I would say in the past couple of months, even Codex has like really changed the way in which we work. And what we see is that people that are using Codex are just like so much more productive. And I think there's an aspect to Codex which is, it allows people who don't code that much to do a little bit of coding, but it also helps very experienced engineers get way more done. And I think that's what I'm really excited about because a really experienced engineer can kind of steer Codex and be like just monstrously productive.
Is that, just sort of the situation where you see engineering productivity patterns starting to shift toward multi-threadedness?
One is to sort of understand how software that exists works. And another is to prototype a new idea to see if it is, sort of the juice is worth the squeeze, if you like. And then lastly, it's to actually get the work done for implementing the new feature. We work in these large code bases. Sometimes, actually, usually the documentation isn't where it needs to be, or the documentation is out of date, or that type of thing. Codecs or other similar tools can read more quickly than you can and give you like a pretty good answer very fast. So I have an idea for the product and I think, well, maybe this is like super interesting and I could spend a bunch of time on it. I can throw together a prototype in Codex and decide, hey, this doesn't quite work the way I want it to. And so maybe I'll choose something else to focus on. And then lastly, some of our most experienced, most productive engineers are just using it to build features in the drive, either refactoring code or just building like the front end code itself, or any aspect of the feature really.
I think that gets at a use case I actually had for Atlas today, which was really interesting to me. I was looking at a GitHub repo and I was running through and I was like, I want to get a sense of what's in this GitHub repo really quickly. What if I just have Atlas look at it and I put the assistant up on the side and I just have a conversation with Atlas about the repo? And what I found was there was this sort of magic that happened when I was in Atlas because I was working with sort of that there's sort of a magic to code comprehension I'm finding with some of sort of the way ChatGPT like touches and plays with code. It was able to like click through, take control of the screen, look at all of the different files in the repo, and it came up with some really, really thoughtful questions that enabled me to get much more fingertippy with the code much more quickly. It was one of those magic moments for me.
So I think the browser, it's so simple, it almost sounds silly, but like reducing the friction for a user to access some of this magic, it can feel like making the magic available, like in the first place. I've always been able to take a web page, maybe you could print it as PDF, or you could copy and paste it into ChatGPT. But that's just like a few extra steps. And when you can just bring this up, in situ and ask the question directly, it's like suddenly it's there. One of my favorite use cases is being shopping. I could do a lot of online shopping when I'm not working. Sometimes I'd be looking at a product and I can ask the sidebar, is this sort of the best price that I can find on this thing? And there, when paired with our search agent, like it will go off and like browse the web and find out if that is the best price or if there's a better deal on it somewhere. I had one case where it hit really well. I was looking at a pair of shoes and it found the shoes available from a different site for about $60 less.
Wow.
And that was one of those like really kind of wow moments.
Yeah, there's something around habit formation where when you get that dopamine hit of, wow, this is really easy. This is something that I didn't realize I could do. What were some of the things that your team really had to wrestle with around trade-offs and decisioning to make that browser come to life?
One is the product design itself, and then the other is the technical infrastructure and all of the magic that went into it. So with the product, we wanted to design something that was really useful, but also felt familiar. Like I said, everyone kind of knows what a browser is. Um, we had lots of debates about how we should design features like basic aspects of the browser. I think there was a lot of room for innovation in those areas, but it's also a bit of a double-edged sword. So we've tried to find a balance between something that feels familiar and yet still has some improvements for folks that are looking to find more efficient ways to get stuff done. And then on the technology side, this is where we spent a lot of time, both on the more traditional browser infrastructure, building on Chromium, as well as how we built some of the more cutting edge features like Agent. We want to build a product that feels very fluid and fast. And we also wanted to build a very cutting edge kind of product user experience and just sort of the standard way in which a lot of Chromium browsers are built. Just don't make that super easy to access. So we built a unique way of holding Chromium. It's almost sort of agentic in form. We run Chromium as an out of process service so that when you start Atlas, you're not actually blocked on Chromium starting up. So the browser can start very, very fast. And then Chromium sort of takes however long it takes to start up. And then when you run a feature like Agent, it is doing things like synthesizing input events to click on things. We're able to do that in a very robust and secure way. So there's a bunch of stuff like that we've done. We did a technical blog post recently that covered this in some more detail. But yeah, we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I recommend if folks listening have not read the technical blog post, if you're at all technically minded, it's a super interesting read. I'm sort of curious, given your experience and sort of all the different browsers you've worked on, to what extent does Atlas feel like a fully solved problem, feel like a partially solved problem? Are there pieces of it that you're really excited to dig your teeth into next? Yeah,
I think this is really the first step in a long journey. Like when I talk to people about this, if I'm talking about browser history, I would say this is like the Netscape 1.0 moment for this new era of like agentic browsers. Um, we're excited to get the agent feature out there, but it's also very much sort of a research preview. We are discovering use cases for it. We're also like really enthusiastic to hear how other people are using it, and we expect to make a lot of improvements, uh, both to the experience, the sort of accuracy, speed. But most folks haven't seen this type of functionality in a browser before, and so we think it's really important to bring people along, with this thing. You're very used to clicking on things yourself, so having a tool that can do that on your behalf. Um, it's both exciting, sometimes maybe a little intimidating. So we want to like be very clear about how the product works. So the first time you use this, we give you sort of this nice disclosure that tells you, what its capabilities are, and we give you some options too. You can choose, for example, if you want the agent to run with your logged in sites, just like it really was browsing as you can make that choice, or you could choose, for example, to have it run logged out, and then you have to be very explicit about what sites you want it to log into, and you go and log into those yourself. And so there's choices like that, for example, that help people, have whatever their comfort level is, to apply that to their use of the product.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there a use case that you heard from the wild post launch that was most surprising or interesting to you?
Well, there's stuff that I think, yeah, super cool. Like I said, I was like an online shopping
Mhm.
fiend. And I'm like, wow, like I used to have to go and have a different tab where I'd go and search for those things and then go and try them back one by one. And so the fact that you could just kind of set this and forget it, and then it would try them all and then pick the best one, that was pretty cool. Um, yeah. And then like not personal use case, but more like work use case. Um, I obviously have been diving through a lot of feedback from our launch the other week. So I wanted to come up with like a quick survey, and so I had this discussion with ChatGPT about some good questions. And then I asked the agent to go off and make a Google form, so I could do the survey. And I've used Google Forms a bunch. It tends to be a bit finicky, the different types of question formats and other stuff. But agent just figured it all out for me. And a few minutes later, I came back. I had this form. I could just publish it right away.
I can think of a lot of government websites that are very frustrating to use that feel like they were built in the 1990s that for me fall into that category. Um, yeah. So then if we switch modes a little bit about the security side of things and how you think about security with LLMs in the browser specifically, and there are divergent opinions ranging from this is an impossible solve to this is tractable to we can make progress in this area. How do you think about it as a problem space?
Yeah, I think this is interesting for agent, which is like a net new capability, and both the technologies evolving. We expect to do a lot of work on it, over the next while. I talked before about just sort of the onboarding and some of the choices you have about, what sort of site access it has, if it's authenticated or not. There's a few other mitigations that we have in place, like if it's going to do something sensitive on your behalf, like be in your email, uh, yeah, it's going to want you to watch it. The analogy I give for this is, I have a car that has this sort of auto drive functionality. I'll be there on the highway, and I can turn on the cruise control, and it will, even take the wheel and steer it a little bit for me. But in return, what it wants is that I keep my eyes on the road, and it has this little camera in the dashboard somewhere that like will shut it off if I'm not paying attention. And so similarly, in Atlas, if you are having the agent do work in one of these sensitive contexts, like your email, it wants you to be on that tab paying attention. If you switch away, it's going to stop. And then another thing that we have is like if you've ever been in a machine shop and worked with a big piece of lathe or something else, there's usually like a big red button somewhere that if it starts doing something you don't want to do, it's very clear. You hit the red button and it stops. And so the agent has that too. And so if you see it doing something that you don't want it to do, then you just hit stop. These are good tools to have, and I think will help people get confidence that you're the one that's still like in control of how it works.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that this is a moment where we have it's new again. And we have the opportunity to revisit a lot of these sort of foundational primitives. I think That sort of brings me to an interesting question. It feels to me like there's an opportunity for shifting the browser experience further, but I'm curious if you turn on the high beams, to use the car metaphor, what does that look like for you?
One of the things I thought was special about the early web was the fact if you go back to that time in the 1990s, you think about how people got software. It was to go to a store, you drive to a store, you buy a box of a product with some shrink wrap, and you take the discs out and you install it. And then you think about the web where you just click on stuff and it comes up on your screen. Like that was pretty magic. And then
Mhm.
that aspect of using the web where you would just go from site to site, it actually, what resonated with me was that it felt kind of like how my mind worked. Now, if you fast forward to LLMs today, it is an even more accessible. I can just talk to this thing, and this thing will figure out kind of what to do. That's maybe like an idea of what the future looks like, where instead of having to dig through a bunch of settings menus, you can just tell the system what you want from it, and it will just figure out how to do it. And then if I sort of extrapolate from there, I actually think like a lot of what people struggle with on a day to day life is in the day-to-day lives is ambiguity. Um, like there's this thing that I want, but I don't quite know how to do it. When I first started using ChatGPT, it was kind of like a friend. It would say, "Oh, if you want to do this, you should, think about taking one of these three steps for something that is about betterment of yourself. Maybe you should go do those things. But for a lot of things that are more tactical, like it would be great if your agent could just go off and do that thing for you and report back on the status of it." And so I think maybe there's some version of the future, but even though I say that, I also think that people will continue to browse the web themselves because there's stuff that as humans we want to do. We want to be entertained, we want to create things.
Yeah, that's a really sort of rich area to dive into. It felt like there were sort of two big buckets that browser work falls into. There's the delight bucket where you're trying to learn, you're trying to be curious, you want to be surprised. And then there's the, oh gosh, I don't want to do this and I would prefer to avoid it. And could someone please take care of that part for me?
Mhm.
And as I was reflecting, it's pretty easy to make the case from an agent perspective that the not fun part is something ideally in a perfect world you'd want the agent to just go and take care of for you. But the fun part to imagine is how could an agent also enrich that delightful side of things?
Yeah, totally. Like I definitely think that trying to reduce toil was like something that we definitely want to support.
Yeah. Browsers have been evolving for 25, 30 years. What does it look like to take the next step in that process? And what is the direction, the trajectory that is changing? And I find that super fascinating because I think we are at an inflection moment.
When I think about the early web, a lot of the focus back then was just, helping people understand those links that are out there and clicking on links and going from place to place. We could go and find like collections of links that people had an opinion about if they were good or not. As the web scaled, that stopped working, and then you got search, and then search was transformative because it helped you find like the little piece of information or the website that you wanted to go to. And people started building these rich apps. And then, as you point out, yeah, inflection point. Now we're in this new stage. We're like made the way in which we can interact with this technology just radically more human, and we can scale up the capabilities of the platform, and the platform will be able to do things on your behalf. I think this is really the third phase of the web.
Yeah, it's super exciting.
There's some UX that we're exploring around it a few different ways, but there's some compelling use cases. Like I think I ran into this before launch when I was trying to you just sort of synthesize a single document from a bunch of different sources that were opened in
Mhm,
the tabs, and then it wouldn't work. So I kind of wanted, I don't think it's even a fixed number of tabs. It's like I wanted, n basically,
mhm.
subject like context window size. But yeah.
We talked about ways of working and how the team is using Codex a little bit. One of the things I've been hearing really consistently from small companies, large companies, individuals is that it feels like roles are blurring as we lean into LLMs more and more and more. And I'm curious if you look at the roles on your team and how they're evolving as you guys work, you know,
Yeah. So um the every engineer on our team is a product engineer. Basically, this is someone that like really thinks about the breadth of the experience. Every engineer on the team is empowered to sort of own the design and development of a feature. And so all of our engineers are talking to users, reading feedback, figuring out how to integrate it into a future update. We have a bunch of tools. I'm not super familiar with like all of the tools that we use, but I know that we use a bunch of LLMs basically to help us sift through feedback, get common themes, that sort of stuff.
Mhm,
So that will help us, understand like what the top pain points are
mhm.
that people are talking about at scale, through our user support forums and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. If we pivot a little bit, sort of back to the future, I would like to see this breakthrough happen, or I would like to see this technical challenge solved, and then we will unlock this new experience. What pops out to you as significant milestones in the next, call it 18 months to 2 years, where you're really excited to see something unlock as we get to a particular capability?
I think people will get more used to this, more accustomed to this functionality. And
Mhm,
so they will seek to do more with it. That is from the customer side. And then on the product side, we will make that sort of magic more real, and sort of help you figure out the opportunities to leverage that magic. Um, the capabilities will continue to increase at a breathtaking pace. And so, what I want to end up in is a place where uh, you could really give this tool fairly ambiguous, complex tasks, and it will break it down and figure out how to make progress on your behalf. I used the word toil before. How do we
mhm.
get rid of some of that annoyance and make it just sort of more reliable, simple, trustworthy? These are things that we want to do.
One of the things we haven't talked about that I'd be curious for your take on, so much of our browsing happens on the phone. Are you guys thinking in terms of mobile?
Yeah, that's another request that's coming a lot. We're trying to figure out the best way to bring this functionality to mobile. I think one of the observations that we have is that the way people interact with the web is a bit different on mobile. So on the desktop platform, the browser is like an embedded operating system. All of your favorite apps, for the most part, are in the browser. Whereas on mobile, the mobile operating system itself is kind of like the browser, and so people tend to have relationships directly with specific apps. But then for the web, there's a couple of different use cases. One is I want to go and read a specific website that I don't have an app for. So then the browser form factor makes a lot of sense. So I think we're at a stage where we're figuring out like how we want to make browsing work on the mobile device, given these different use cases.
The way mobile works implies dramatically different usage patterns. What it looks like from a small screen perspective to have the chat assistant there and the browsing experience. It's super interesting challenges to get into.
Yeah, there's a bunch of also interesting stuff. Think like voice is a very compelling
Yeah.
modality, where if you load a page that you can ask follow up questions and have all of that work. I think we just need to figure out the right way to build that.
And yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't dive into one of the more interesting features that you've launched with Atlas, and that is that you guys bring in the Chat GPT memory from previous Chat GPT conversations, and that is part of the browse experience. I'd be curious for like the product decisioning there, and then how you think about that as an asset to the browsing experience and what that looks like.
Well, the chat memory feature of ChatGPT is like an incredibly powerful one. And
Mhm.
it means that like as you move from chat to chat, that you don't always have to start from zero, but in some sense, like makes it feel like it knows you a bit better in that way.
And that's a really interesting way in which the browser becomes more useful the more you use it. So, one thing I always love to do is we sort of bring this conversation to a little bit of a close. If you could say one thing that you feel like, people didn't quite get that piece of the launch, I'd love to try and say it again and emphasize it. What would that be for you for Atlas?
So for Atlas, I think that it is a familiar tool, but with this amazing new set of capabilities.
Mhm.
And so I encourage you to go and try it out for a whole bunch of different things. I would say even challenge yourself to ask more questions of it, or things that even if you were thinking, oh, I don't need to ask that, just try it out and see what it does. I would say this is the beginning of a journey for us to build this type of app. We push a new build every week. And so as we hear more feedback from you as you try it out and do a lot of different interesting things, we will make it better and better.
Well,
Thank
thank you, Ben. Thank you for coming and chatting.
Yeah, it's been great. Awesome. I appreciate it.